I spoke with the former Prime Minister of Israel and perhaps also the next Prime Minister of Israel, depending on the outcome of their November 1st election. He's the author of a new book, Bibi, My Story, Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Prime Minister, congratulations on your new book. And I must tell you that I've interviewed you many times and I learned so much. You filled in a lot of the blanks for me over these years.
Well, thank you. I was glad to have the opportunity to share my life as a soldier, as a diplomat, as a statesman, fighting to ensure the survival and future of the Jewish state, but also in the battle, the larger battle for freedom and our common values. I think it's a way of sharing a life of purpose with the readers who seek a life of purpose. I think they might glean valuable insights in the book. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did, sir. All right, let me turn to your life as a soldier and as a statesman and go right to Ukraine. Is there any chance in your mind that this could unravel worse into a global conflict?
I didn't think so at the beginning, I have to say. But the more it drags on with all its horrors and tragedy, it may spiral out of control. And if that happens, that could be the crossing of a red line that the world has not crossed for 77 years. That is the possible use of nuclear weapons. I don't think it's likely, but I can no longer say that it's completely out of the question. And that's something that has to be handled very prudently and responsibly.
All right, well, that decision appears to be President Putin's because I don't see anyone else doing that in advance. So what would be your recommendation so that this doesn't happen? When you say handling it, what specifically can we do, should we do?
Well, look, if I get elected in 2 weeks, if God willing that happens, then I'll have I hope to have a very discreet conversation with the President of the United States, because this is an issue that involves all countries. It involves the entire world. And whatever thoughts I have, I'll keep to that point if I'm in a position to offer my help.
Have you ever met Putin?
Oh, yes, many times. Many times. Yeah, we in Israel and Russia. Well, I'll tell you what my thought was when we met. I mean, we have the Russian Air Force and the Israeli Air Force literally bumping into each other over the skies of Syria, because I was firmly committed as Prime Minister to prevent Iran from building a second front, a second terror front opposite Israel on the Golan Heights, on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. So I went to Moscow and said to Putin, look, we could coordinate with each other or we could fight each other. The last time Syrian and Israeli pilots were firing at each other was in the War of Attrition following the Six-Day War in 1968-69. We actually shot down 6 MiG aircraft at that time. And I said it's not a good idea to spark a Russian-Israeli war. And he agreed with that. So we coordinated our military so that we don't bump into each other. And we've been able, because of that, to ensure the freedom of action over the skies of Syria for our Air Force. And that's what a lot of our discussions were about. And the other thing they were about was Iran. I asked Putin not to sell Iran very dangerous equipment. That held true for a few years, but it didn't hold true always. And I also disagreed with him when he had their own bilateral dealings with Iran, you know, economic dealings, oil dealings, and so on. So it was very businesslike, and at least as far as the Syrian front is concerned, very successful, because we've avoided war, we've avoided combat between us, and we've been able to maintain Israel's freedom of action against the implantation of the Iranian army or its surrogates across our border.
Well, it looks, though, that there could be some sort of, connection or crossing over with Russia now, because Ukraine has now asked for Israel for Iron Dome, so it gets Israel more involved in this. I know Israel's been providing some humanitarian aid and some helmets and things like that, but it seems like Israel, if it sends those Iron Domes, is getting more involved, and Putin's going to see that as Israel being more involved.
That's correct, and I think that's an issue I would look into when I get into office. But so far, Israel has offered a lot of humanitarian help. That is completely disproportionate to our size. We've taken an enormous amount of Ukrainian refugees, Jews and non-Jews, sent field hospitals, helped in other ways. But this would be a very critical question to look at. And if I get into office, I'll look into it.
You know, they're talking now today about Putin relocating Ukrainians, which is, it's sort of hauntingly similar to relocation from, from history and the Holocaust. I look at this and I think, it's only getting in a worse direction. Is there anything when you look at this that gives you sort of a sense of hope?
I have some thoughts. Again, I've been. Some people asked me to intervene in this when I was out of office, and I thought that's not right. There's a government, there's a prime minister who has since left office, but I'm not prime minister yet. So whatever thoughts I have a few thoughts. Perhaps some of them may contribute to the ending of this tragedy. And again, in 2 weeks' time, we'll know if those thoughts have any merit, because if I make it, then I'll look into it. And more than look into it, see what I can do.
Let me turn now to Iran. Iran wants to destroy Israel. I mean, it's never backed off that. And you've got this agreement that President Obama struck in 2015. President Trump took us out of it. Now there's more discussion about an agreement. It seems to be stalled. But everyone says Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. What's stopping, at this point, with stalled agreements, or even with an agreement they're moving forward, what's going to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon?
Look, I don't think any agreement will stop them. First of all, they cheat like hell. I mean, they cheat every time. So it's meaningless. The only thing that can stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon is a combination of crippling sanctions and a credible military option. There have been 5 rogue states that have sought to develop nuclear weapons. The first 2, Saddam Hussein's Iraq and Syria, were stopped by Israeli military action. The third, Libya, was stopped by the threat of American military action. The fourth, North Korea, which had dozens of deals and signed treaties and everything, nobody threatened them with anything. So they developed a nuclear arsenal, and half of Asia is now shaking in fear. They just fired a missile over Japan, and they might very well be able to reach the United States very soon with nuclear weapons. They weren't challenged. Okay, the fifth is Iran, that has been challenged primarily by Israel under my leadership, and President Trump, who joined in, and at one time also President Obama, who joined the sanctions. But once they had them on the floor, they were really, I mean, I write about this in my book, they were on the floor. They were suffering from these sanctions which were imposed on them. And then they went to the bargaining table, and basically the West, led by the United States, gave it all away and gave them a highway paved with gold to become a threshold nuclear state. What does that mean? It means that all they have to do is a very short procedure of a few weeks to have an armed nuclear arsenal. So I said, look, the deals are not going to make it. The only thing that will make it is a tough stance. And I had to decide, going against this dangerous nuclear deal that gave Iran hundreds of billions of dollars. You see, Greta, you and the entire world can see what this regime is about, what they're doing to their women, what they're doing to their citizens, gunning them on the sidewalks or taking them into interrogation and murdering them. I mean, I salute the brave men and brave women of Iran for standing up to this totalitarian evil regime. And yet, the West was giving these people who chant death to America, call you the great Satan, they were giving them hundreds of billions of dollars of sanctions relief that would enable them to become a threshold nuclear state. That's not a good idea. So I had to decide, and this was one of the highlights in my public career so far, I had to decide whether to go and speak against this deal. And I finally, after considerable reflection, decided to do it and go to the American Congress, a joint session of Congress, in which I took the unusual step of speaking against the policies of a sitting American president. And believe me, we respect all American presidents. But when the security of my country, its very existence, was put on the line, I didn't think I had a choice. So I spoke out against it. I'm glad President Trump got out of that deal. And I think this is one of the reasons why we could have 4 historic peace treaties with the Arab states, because they saw that Israel and the United States were standing up to our common foe, Iran. I think there's a lot of me in there, and I described a lot of the backroom scenes and conversations and secret meetings that led up to the historic Abraham Accords and to the decision to go and speak in the joint session of Congress. It wasn't easy.
All right, we talk about a credible military option as being what needs to be done. Is that I think most people agree that that it would not be good if Israel had to go alone. But when you talk about options from other nations, if you look just at the United States, is that we told President of Syria that our red line is chemical weapons. That's our red line. While we passed the red line, used chemical weapons, and it was essentially, with all due respect to to the people who made the decision, that was ignored here in the United States. I don't know what we would have done, but that red line. We've made threats about other countries. I mean, even our current president has said that Saudi Arabia is a pariah because of the Washington Post columnist who was murdered in Turkey. But then we go over there looking for oil because we need oil. So I mean, all these sort of threats that people make or that countries make, do they really have an impact? Because Iran is still marching towards a nuclear weapon, no matter what everybody has said, no matter what deals have been written or torn up.
Well, I didn't say credible military threat. I said credible military option. Whether you threaten or not is not the point. The point is you have to have the capacity to stop Iran if it decides to go ahead. I have taken many decisions and authorized many clandestine operations. One of them was public. I made it public. I sent the Mossad to the heart of Tehran to take away, really to pilfer Iran's secret atomic archive. And did you see the movie Argo, where this chase within the streets of Tehran against these diplomats? You remember this one? This was Argo on steroids. I mean, so our people took half a ton of disks and files, and the Iranians were chasing them, and finally they were able to come out, bring the files to Israel, and we proved to the entire world that Iran was lying, and that is as early as 2003, they had a file, they had a program, which the program had one goal. It said, produce 5 atomic bombs with such and such kilotons, which means basically 5 Hiroshima bombs. This is 20 years ago. And they decided to hide this program under civilian guise after Saddam Hussein was removed, because they thought they'd be next. But I'm telling you, that's the only time they stopped the program, because they thought America would take military action after it vanquished Iraq. There is no other way to stop them. And I'm telling you that people say, well, would that lead to war? I'd say that would prevent war. That would prevent the people who are, it's not that difficult to knock out the Iranian nuclear program. I'm not saying it's a walk in the park, but it's not impossible to do. I've never given up that option, and if need be, and I'm the prime minister, I'll make sure that Iran doesn't have it. If I have to do it, if Israel has to do it alone, we'll do it alone. I'd rather have a consortium of nations, beginning with the United States, who realize that Iran, the Ayatollahs, this radical Islamic regime, who's opposed to our way of life, who wants to destroy Israel, destroy America, and anything in between, to have them have nuclear weapons is not the same as having Holland with nuclear weapons. This would be a mortal threat to the peace of the world and to our societies and civilizations. So, do you want to face Iran later with nuclear weapons? Is that preferable?
Let me turn to, if you are elected Prime Minister again, will you have a phone call with the Prime Minister of Australia, who has just done a 180, and she has decided that the capital will not be Jerusalem, but they will recognize Tel Aviv.
Well, you know, it's so absurd, Greta. I mean, Jerusalem has been the capital of the Jewish people for 3,000 years, since King David, roughly in the year 1000 BCE, decided to call it our capital. And it's been the focus of and the nexus of the Jewish people. We prayed next year in Jerusalem for centuries. And I was born in Jerusalem. It's the capital. Our government is there. The Prime Minister's office is there. Our parliament, the Knesset, is there. The Supreme Court is there. This is ridiculous. I mean, it's as absurd as saying, well, I don't recognize Washington as the capital of America. I don't recognize Paris as the capital of France. And I don't recognize London as the capital of Britain. It's ridiculous and absurd. I hope they change their mind, but it's not going to make a difference. And by the way, I congratulate President Trump for having removed this absurdity and finally having the United States recognize Jerusalem. United Jerusalem is our eternal capital and will stay that way with or without Australia. And they'll come around later.
Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much, sir, and good luck.